Broadcasting Company.
Hey everyone, I'm Simone, and tonight on Signal, Bezos drops a bombshell accusing the National Enquirer of extortion. Then we go to Venezuela's border, where the country's political crisis is spilling over into neighboring Colombia. And everyone knows Italy takes food seriously, but did you know the country synonymous with carbs has a burgeoning gluten-free movement? But first, today, Democrats rolled out their plan to tackle climate change, the Green New Deal. It's an ambitious proposal to reform transportation and infrastructure with the hopes of dropping U.S. carbon emissions to zero by 2030. Now, it does not include the controversial carbon tax, and it also doesn't explain how Dems are going to pay for the plan. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts introduced the resolution. AOC stopped by MSNBC's Meet the Press Daily to talk about House Speaker Pelosi's reaction to the Green New Deal. And spoiler alert, Pelosi didn't seem too impressed.
This is a big part of when you actually break down our strategy on the Green New Deal. Even when you go all the way back to our requests in the fall, we were talking about the need to draft or come up with a blueprint by 2020. Because what this really is an organizing play. It's so that by 2020, we can get all of those chess pieces in order. We can get a majority in the House, we can get a majority in the Senate, we can capture the presidency, and we can get things done.
So when Pelosi was asked about it, she couldn't come up with the name of it and called it the Green Dream. But despite Pelosi talking about the deal the same way your parents probably did with your Pokemon cards, plenty of 2020 contenders like Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren are lending their support. So the Green New Deal has its fan club in the Democratic-controlled House. But there's an ice cube's chance in global warmed Antarctica this resolution would get a vote in Mitch McConnell's Senate. So I was curious, what's the Dem strategy here? Fire up the base with an aggressive new agenda? I called Waleed Shahid from Justice Democrats. That's the organization that helped get AOC elected. So the numbers aren't there for the Green New Deal to pass. And I'm just curious, what are you hoping to accomplish with this if those odds are against you?
Well, right now, it's, a lot of people ask, what is the Democratic Party for? The Green New Deal is a positive vision for what our society could be. It's a renewal of a social contract that, started under the New Deal around FDR's call for a second Bill of Rights, a right to a job, a right to health care, a right to housing, a right to compete without monopolies. And the Green New Deal really takes that tradition of Democratic Party liberalism and expands it for the 21st century, where we have our economy and climate changing so rapidly. We need government to step in and create a new social contract that provides every American with what they need to thrive.
There are a few scientists, members of the science community, that have said that, 2030, that might be a lofty goal. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's the goal being set up by the UN's IPCC report, so we're following that along. The United States has 12 years to rapidly transform our economy and society to preserve the stable climate that human civilization has depended on for millennia, that we have to drastically cut emissions, have to drastically move off fossil fuels. I mean, thousands of Americans died this past year due to wildfires, hurricanes, and heat waves. And if we don't take bold action now, we're going to continue to put forward piecemeal solutions that don't actually solve the problem or don't solve the crisis and actually don't meet the recommendations of science.
Climate change solutions require the kind of support from both parties that we saw with criminal justice reform late last year when the First Step Act actually passed. So Republicans have a reputation for being climate change skeptics, but there are some conservatives working to change the narrative, like Debbie Dooley. She runs an organization that advocates for renewable energy and less government involvement. I wanted to find out if progressives like AOC can find common ground with Tea Party members like Debbie. Debbie, you are a conservative. You believe humans are causing climate change, but you do not support the Green New Deal. Tell me why.
Well, definitely, I am one of the national co-founders of the Tea Party movement, a lifelong conservative. I absolutely, positively, without a doubt, believe in climate change and that fossil fuels are damaging our environment, but I support free market solutions to help protect our earth and mitigate against the catastrophic implications of climate change.
So what is it that you take issue with in the Green New Deal?
Just about all of it, because it seems like it's socialism. I don't believe in guaranteed income. What I would like to see would be for the government to encourage research and development, to put more money towards innovative technology. I think this Green New Deal is just going to make my job a lot harder to say, I don't agree with that. I support, I believe in climate change. I support renewables. I support freedom and choice. Let's come up with real solutions both sides can agree on.
All right, we'll have to wait and see if that can actually happen, if both sides can work together. But Ocasio-Cortez also talked about what she's looking for in a 2020 candidate on Meet the Press Daily.
Let's be frank here. You've created a political movement. However people want to disagree. So you have some, potentially you might have some sway, right? Nobody wants to assume anything. What are you looking for in a presidential nominee this year?
Well, first, just corollary. I don't think I've created a political movement. I think I'm part of one.
Fair enough.
But I think in terms of what I look for, I think that it's really about the comprehensive understanding of this moment that we're in right now as a country and our ability to articulate it. And so I don't think that a 2020 nominee can afford to be bad on issues of race. Mm-hmm. I don't think they can afford to be bad on issues of economic justice either. I think.
How do you define economic justice, though?
So when we talk about things like the role of the labor movement, the role of labor in the working conditions of everyday Americans, when we talk about fighting doggedly for workers, for whether it's wages, whether it's union jobs, whether it's good jobs, I think that is what we're really talking about in terms of fighting for economic justice.
All right, changing the subject here, Venezuela is still in crisis mode, and the U.S. is doubling down on its support of opposition leader Juan Guaido over embattled Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Now, the U.S. has been sending aid, but it's getting caught up in all the political turmoil there. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is on the Venezuelan border.
Hey, Simone, we're here on the Colombian side of the border where truckloads of U.S. humanitarian aid have just arrived here for the first time. But we're on a pedestrian bridge where tens of thousands of Venezuelans come here every day. Many of them are coming across the border to get supplies, some of them carrying rolling suitcases in order to bring them back into their country. Tens of thousands of people make this trek every day. And earlier today, we were at a soup kitchen where more than 8,000 meals were served. Some of the parents we spoke with say they were desperate to just get some food, some bread and milk for their young children, and they made the desperate journey into Colombia to do so. And you can come over here and see the Venezuelans coming this way. They're heading into Colombia. Over there is a sea of humanity from Colombia coming back towards Venezuela. Again, this is a daily occurrence. That new humanitarian aid that just arrived here at the border at a bridge and warehouse not too far from here, about a 10-minute drive, that is seen as a major test for the new U.S.-backed interim government of Juan Guaido. He says that humanitarian aid must make it into Venezuela, but the regime of Nicolas Maduro has vowed not to let that aid into Venezuela. He says that his country is not one of beggars, and he denies that a humanitarian crisis even exists. So the question will be when and even if all that humanitarian aid, truckloads of it, will be allowed into Venezuela. Meanwhile, many of those that we spoke with today say that the situation is dire. They want to see Nicolas Maduro taken out of that country, and they tell us they're desperate, they're hungry, and that they need help.
Great reporting there from Gabe. Thank you. All right, earlier this week, congressmen and women gathered in Washington to hear the State of the Union. In addition to the 535 elected members that can vote on the floor, there are 6 non-voting members of Congress. In Puerto Rico's case, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon has more constituents than any other congressperson but can't vote on their behalf. I went to D.C. and San Juan to figure out if that still makes sense. Congress is supposed to be simple. Each state gets 2 senators, then a number of representatives based on population. So what happens if you're a member of Congress who's not part of the 50 states? You represent more U.S. citizens than any other member of Congress, and yet you're not able to vote on the House floor.
I think that's the unfinished business of American democracy.
This is Puerto Rico's resident commissioner. Jennifer Gonzalez Colon. She's the only person who represents the island in Congress. And while she can introduce bills and serve on committees, she can't actually vote on behalf of her 3.2 million constituents.
We are like a second-class citizenship. We are not a state, but yet we are not an independent nation.
Nearly a quarter of Americans don't realize it, but Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. So why don't they have full representation in Congress? Some quick history. Puerto Rico was a colony under Spain until the U.S. took control after the Spanish-American War. It became a territory like Hawaii and Alaska, though they ultimately joined the Union. Today, the island remains one of 5 major U.S. territories, and the rules are, well, confusing. For example, Puerto Ricans can serve in the American military, yet they can't vote for president of the United States. And although most don't pay federal income taxes, they still contribute towards Social Security, unemployment, and Medicare. They just don't receive as much funding for things like Medicaid and food stamps. It's a lot to take in, but their congresswoman thinks it could all be temporary.
For many years, the resident commissioner was just for getting the funds. For me, it's more than that. It's accomplishing, finalizing the relationship with the U.S., letting Puerto Rico become a state.
Congress says it'll support statehood if that's what Puerto Ricans want. So the island spent decades holding votes to try and gain consensus. Hasn't been easy, though. In their referendum 2 years ago, 97% of the vote went to statehood. But opposition groups boycotted the ballot, so only 23% of registered voters hit the polls. Do you think it's fair to say that there's overwhelming support when not everyone is really turning out?
The people who voted are the people who are allowed to select what's going to be the future for Puerto Rico.
Okay, she's got a point, but why doesn't everyone support statehood? I mean, wouldn't more representation in Congress be a good thing? I wanted to know more, so I headed to San Juan. We're here in this stadium that has a lot of history.
Well, this was the largest shelter in Puerto Rico.
How did Hurricane Maria shift the conversation around statehood?
We were always told if anything happens to Puerto Rico, the U.S. will come to your aid. And all of a sudden, for those that believed in statehood, help didn't come.
You probably remember her, Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz. She belongs to a party that's traditionally supported the Commonwealth system, but even she's looking to change the status quo. So you favor something called a free association.
What we have right now worked for a while, but it doesn't work anymore. Free association, you sit down and you talk about, okay, what are going to be your responsibilities? What are going to be my responsibilities?
The U.S. already has some of these agreements, where you're treated as your own nation, but still use the dollar and support the American military. You also rely on the U.S. for financial assistance, and that's important here. Lots of Puerto Ricans have already left the island because of its crushing debt. But I talked to someone who wants to take this all one step further.
This is the Puerto Rican Independence Party flag. The color for hope is green, so we have the hope that we'll become an independent country.
Adrián González is part of Puerto Rico's Independence Party. It has a small but passionate presence here. How much of this fight for independence is about cultural identity for you?
Even the statehood followers see themselves as Puerto Ricans. When we have the Olympic Games, statehood followers, they are not cheering for the USA basketball team. They are cheering for the Puerto Rican basketball team. We dream in Spanish. We pray in Spanish. It's an invisible resistance to assimilation of another country which invaded this country more than 100 years ago.
Congresswoman González is planning another referendum, this time with a simple yes or no vote on statehood. But even if turnout is high, a recent poll suggests the island is still pretty divided on all this. Plus, regardless of what's decided, Congress still makes the final call. The reality is, there's just no quick fix to Puerto Rico's lack of representation. That's the thing with being a territory, though. Even as they try to move forward, they still seem stuck in neutral. And here are some of today's headlines briefly. The transcript of a sealed hearing with Paul Manafort is out tonight, and it reveals that Manafort, the president's former campaign chair, was still working with at least one political client in Ukraine into 2018, after he had already been indicted in the special counsel's investigation. The hearing was actually held to look into Manafort's alleged lies to the special counsel. According to the transcripts, one of those alleged misstatements related to conversations with a person tied to Russian intelligence, while Manafort was Trump's campaign chair, and they continued through 2018. Now, just for background, Manafort was indicted by a federal grand jury in October 2017. He and his partner, Rick Gates, who also worked for the Trump campaign, were charged with money laundering, bank fraud, and conspiracy against the U.S. And this just happened. Jeff Bezos is accusing the National Enquirer's parent company, American Media Inc., of blackmail and extortion. In a detailed statement on Medium, Bezos says a lawyer for AMI, the parent company of National Enquirer, emailed his legal counsel yesterday with a threat that it would publish scandalous pictures and text if he didn't drop an investigation into how AMI received personal text that exposed his extramarital affair last month. In exchange for not publishing the photos, AMI demanded that Bezos stop the Washington Post, which he owns, from reporting about political motivations behind the National Enquirer's initial reports about his affair. David Pecker, CEO of AMI, which owns National Enquirer, and President Donald Trump are known to be friends, and Pecker has been accused of buying controversial stories about Trump to keep them private. NBC has reached out to AMI and Amazon for comment, and NBC News has not seen copies of the letters independently. All right, President Trump signed a memo in the Oval Office today to launch the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative. The White House is calling this the first ever whole-of-government approach to focus on economic development for women. It aims to help women across the developing world with access to technology and education and credit for women entrepreneurs. Ivanka Trump hosted an event in advance of the signing.
More than 100 countries still have laws preventing women from working in specific jobs, with more than 2.7 billion women legally restricted from having the same job choices as men. In the last year, the U.S. government has helped change over 600 policies and laws and regulations around the world to enable women to more freely access their local economies.
Well, Gucci stopped selling a $900 sweater that some think resembles blackface. The turtleneck's black wool covers the nose and includes a red cutout for the mouth. It was criticized on social media as being insensitive and racist at a time when the U.S. is dealing with several stories of politicians in blackface. Gucci issued an apology and said it is committed to turning the incident into a powerful learning moment. And because blackface has been in the news so much lately, we thought we should specify what that means and why it has a racist connotation. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines it as makeup applied to a performer playing a black person, especially in a minstrel show. So we leave it to you. Did the sweater cross a line? And those are your headlines, briefly. We'll be right back in 30 seconds.
We are going to start with something different tonight. This is one of those things that you have not been otherwise hearing about in the news, but stick with me.
Feed your mind with fresh perspective. Get your favorite MSNBC shows now as podcasts.
The topics we cover on MSNBC every day, they're driven by big ideas, big themes, huge societal changes. And that's what we talk about on our new podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening?
Why Is This Happening with Chris Hayes. New episodes every Tuesday.
All right, you've probably heard about Joaquin Guzman Loera, better known as El Chapo, the infamous alleged drug kingpin currently on trial in federal court in Brooklyn. Prosecutors have rested their case, and the jury just wrapped up their 4th day of deliberations. Now, while we wait for a verdict, and fair warning, we could be waiting a while, we asked Telemundo's Rebecca Smith for the most interesting things she learned about the cartel while covering the case.
Hi, Simone. I've been covering this trial for the past 3 months. We have seen 56 witnesses. We have heard over 200 hours of testimony. And for some people, this would have been a cut and dry trial, but not for the jurors in this courtroom. Basically, what they've been requesting and why the reason the deliberations are taking so long is because they're asking for the transcript testimonies of the closest allies to El Chapo, including the Cifuentes brothers. Alex Cifuentes was the one to drop the bombshell, and he acknowledged that El Chapo paid the former Mexican president Enrique Peña Nieto $100 million in cash towards bribes. And the problem that the jurors are facing is that there's really no compelling true evidence that can link El Chapo with the former president One of the biggest surprises, and I would say for El Chapo included, is that his IT guy took the stand. He was in charge of encrypting all the communication system for the Sinaloa cartel. So he started working for him, he started cooperating with the FBI, which means the FBI had direct access to El Chapo's communication, including with his employees, with his mistresses, including his wife. We also learned a lot about El Chapo's personality. He suffered from some sort of paranoia. He always wanted to know who was talking about him, spying on him. So actually the FBI used his own paranoia to get to him. We also learned that El Chapo loved the attention of the media. He had a book written, he wanted to do a movie, he was going to be actually the director of his own movie. He had meetings with producers, including Sean Penn and the Mexican actress Kate Del Castillo. Many of the witnesses we saw in this courthouse, they were not even recognizable anymore, just because they've been under heavy plastic surgery. There's this one guy that has been under the knife 16 times. You can see his face is bloated, his cheekbones are more pronounced, his jaw as well, his skin is stretched, and this just tells you the length these guys are willing to go to just to go undetected. Although the jury is taking its time, El Chapo is facing 10 different counts, and he could be facing, if found guilty, from 10 years to life in prison. But let's say the jury decides El Chapo is not guilty. Well, he still has 6 different indictments only in the U.S., like Chicago, El Paso, and San Diego. So what will happen to El Chapo? It still remains to be seen.
Well, if you lived through the early 90s, chances are you've heard of Lorena Bobbitt, or at least know that she captured headlines for dismembering her husband with a kitchen knife. But almost 30 years later, a new film by executive producer Jordan Peele revisits the incident, shedding light on a part of the story that got lost in the limelight, the emotional and physical abuse suffered by the documentary's namesake. Lorena.
I can't believe it's been 25 years. Does it feel like that to you, or does it feel like yesterday?
Well, kind of both. I mean, it went fast, but at the same time, if we're talking about helping women in changing laws, there is a lot much more to be done.
Why do you think there was so much attention on what you did rather than why you did it?
Based on the act itself, that it was a severe organ, a male organ, that changes the whole perspective of the story.
For people who just saw the headlines and the jokes back then,
yes,
and maybe didn't know the real reasons why, what would you like them to know about what you went through?
As a victim, what I went through, I felt very alone, isolated, and I thought it was happening to me only.
So how much does the Me Too movement meant to you?
I applaud the Me Too and Time's Up, because those are voices that need to be heard. We need to be strong. And I think my story, the documentary, will actually, push that conversation again on the table and say, look, I mean, we have this happen. Yes, it happened 25 years ago, but things are not changing much. Things need to be changed a lot more.
And you can watch much more of that interview with Lorena Bobbitt tomorrow during the 8 and 9 o'clock hours of NBC's Today. Okay, changing subjects. I don't know about you guys, but when I think about Italy, I think about delicious, delicious carbs and mountains of them. From pasta to pizza and delicious crusty breads, Italy is basically Mecca for all things gluten, which is why we were so surprised to learn that it's also host to a growing population that's living life gluten-free. NBC's Left Field, Sky Dylan Robbins, a correspondent from Left Field, went to Puglia to find out more.
The gluten-free diet in America has become more than just trendy. It's almost normal. But what happens when going gluten-free comes to the gluten capital of the world?
Benvenuto in Italia, la terra di pane e pasta. So I went to Italy to film some other stories, but during my trip, I noticed little signs, senza glutine, without gluten, seemingly everywhere. Is it just that it's becoming really trendy here too? Or is something else in the oven?
Laboratori in Italia che fanno il senza glutine sono solo adesso, da ultimi 5 anni a questa parte se ne sono aperti tantissimi. Diciamo che fino a 10 anni fa erano pochissimi noi. La celiachia è un'intolleranza che si sta sviluppando in Italia in modo allarmante. Aumentano di anno in anno, 10-15 mila all'anno. Allora,
hold on. We'll go back to Luigi Caparelli, who's behind the first gluten-free operation in the whole southern region of Puglia, in a sec. But first, some essentials. Gluten's a protein that's naturally found in wheat, rye, and barley. And celiac disease affects about 1% of the American and also the Italian populations. But millions are undiagnosed and really sensitive to it. It's also, of course, really trendy, which partially explains the enormous growth of the market. But back to the bread.
Noi in Italia abbiamo una tradizione culinaria basata sul pane.
Rosanna Capogno has been a specialist in gluten-free products in Italy for over a decade.
Hai capito, Sky?
Faccio di nuovo.
Ha 80 anni.
Questo è il nostro segreto, questo è il cuore del nostro pane.
Before Luigi and his gluten-free world, Rosanna took us to Altamura, a nearby city that's famous for its bread, with gluten.
Nel momento in cui una persona viene diagnosticata la celiachia, il primo terrore è quello proprio che deve fare a meno del pane, che per noi è la sciagura peggiore che ti può capitare.
So what does Italy do? It offers a stipend of up to 140 euros a month to those diagnosed with celiac disease, and they take it really seriously.
C'è un ministero che controlla e autorizza la lavorazione. Nel momento in cui un produttore gluten-free non rispetta qualche canone, noi abbiamo dei procedimenti penali, quindi da noi si finisce in galera, spesso non per altre cose, ma se produci male il gluten-free di sicuro.
Over the last few years, there's been such a demand for Luigi's products that now he does it on a very large scale. Health fads aside, what's behind this increasing demand?
La richiesta è aumentata in virtù del fatto che non c'era una conoscenza medico-scientifico come c'è adesso e in più il grano nel tempo ha avuto dei mutamenti, non è OGM, però l'uomo nel tempo lo ha modificato. Alla fine ha prodotto un grano che ha un valore glutinico molto alto. Dato che il corpo umano è una macchina perfetta e non è stato pensato per quel valore glutinico, è logico che poi uno stadio di infiammazione sia il minimo che ti possa accadere fondamentalmente.
Oh wow, buonissimo. Poco poco. Vuoi uno?
Well, you can tell this American's never been to Puglia because I didn't know how to pronounce Puglia. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.